So, good morning. Thank you for coming to our seasonal dialogue. Last semester we had a talk about culture appropriation. Sadly, there was two important guests cancelled last minute. So now actually Miel also have a bad back. But we have three amazing superstars here. As you know Dylan and also Lou. Maybe Jen, you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Yes, good morning. My name is Jennifer Coates. My pronouns are she, her. I don't work in fashion, I work in IT. I'm a network engineer by trade, trained in l'IPFL in Lausanne. My mother tongue is French, so please pardon my German today. I know.
So, as you know, this topic this season would be gender identities. We start from 9:30 until 10:30. We have a break half an hour until 11 for you to think about what they're saying and maybe accumulate some questions, because after that from 11 till 12 you have a discussion and dialogue with the superstars. Is that okay? Good. You can start.
So, hi, I'm Dylan. It's a bit redundant, you know that. My pronouns are they and them. So yeah.
I'm Lou. My pronouns are they, she.
So there's different topics that we're kind of going to broach today. And for this to feel kind of less awkward for people just standing in front of you and talking for an hour, we really encourage that you ask questions as the conversation is happening, so it feels more natural, let's say. So we're going to talk about pronouns. So how do you ask for pronouns? What pronouns are, kind of gender identity and gender expression, what's similar, what's different. Workplace sensibility, so how do we broach these topics in the context of the workplace, as students, as teachers, how it impacts us in society, let's say, and how we can have constructive conversations, and what can you do, let's say, as potential future allies or as allies to help further this conversation. So why do you think, for example, pronouns are an important basis for conversation, let's say?
To really see who the person you're speaking with is. And it's kind of hard. It's always nice if you start a conversation and say your pronouns. So for us it's not, for me it's hard if you enter a room with a lot of cis people and then people assuming your gender according to how you're appearing. So yeah, it makes it a lot easier and more comfortable and being seen as who I am.
I don't know, for me my main question is, everybody assumes they know what gender is. I think many people here know what their gender is because they align with how they were born and grew up. And some people during their development kind of realize something else is different, and that how they grew up as a child does not really reflect who they want to present as to the rest of the society. For me, gender is a societal norm. Obviously, when you grow up, you learn your normal pronouns, cis, right, aligned with your sexual characteristics. Cis being aligned, trans being not aligned, being different. A lot of things here are assumed, right? One of the first things our minds do when they come into a room is try to determine what your gender is, right? And of course, without talking to a person, the only clues you have are their external presentation and their clothing. Here, obviously, we want to break down and say, well, don't assume. And there's a joke in English where when you say, people assume they make an ass out of you and me. That's generally what happens, right? And so to try and break that barrier, I think it's really important when you meet someone new, just to confirm those assumptions. And that way you know you're on the same footing. It can also be that some people have, I don't know, issues growing up, hormonal imbalances, and so their development of their body doesn't necessarily align with typical, the norm, right? Some people grow wider, taller, broader shoulders, broader hips, smaller, etc. Right? There's a whole variation, and I think asking people for their pronouns is part of that, asking to confirm that variability. So for me, typically, even if my voice, for example, can seem feminine, it can sometimes become deeper depending on the interaction, depending on the power play that's in a setting, especially in our what's the word? Not paternalistic, but patriarchal society, right? Where men lead generally. Personally, I prefer something more equal, and sometimes relationships are not defined on that particular notion. Sometimes it's more about competency, and I think it's important also to bring forward that aspect and say, well, yeah, I'm she, her, they, them, or whatever other combination you prefer, but then assert your own presence and your competence.
I think that raises a lot of interesting points about what gender, like the conversation of gender, how we can understand it universally, I guess from a socialized aspect that we can all understand, which is kind of stereotypes that are brought upon you when you're born. I think that this is something that we can all kind of understand. I think that we can also kind of understand this like emotional and mental aspect that relates then to physical appearance. It just differentiates for people who don't identify as cisgender. I think language is also a really important thing to broach, because currently we're speaking in English, and as Jen mentioned to me just before, English isn't like super gendered, but French and German are really gendered languages. So what is kind of the common ground? How do we approach talking about this in a language that can be as inclusive as possible? I can't really talk about that when it comes to German, because German is, I can speak it, so I personally feel like if for some reason you, I think it's terrible to assume gender just based on physical appearance, because it kind of raises the questions of like gender identity and gender expression. Some people are perceived from the exterior, from their physical presentation, to be of a certain gender, and sometimes this doesn't match with how they feel about themselves. So kind of always asking pronouns is kind of a healthy way to go about it. If you're in a situation where for some reason you can't really do that, for whatever reason, you're in a crowd, it doesn't feel like the right moment to do it or whatever, I always feel like call someone by their name. If language-wise this is something that you're having trouble adapting to, I think that of course people are going to make mistakes. This is kind of the point of learning and progressing and getting to a point where you can be more inclusive in your language, but I think that using people's name is really just the safe way to start, I guess. How do you feel about that?
I think it's the easiest way to not hurt someone and to be inclusive. And I think with German, it takes practice to unlearn, because we grow up with this gendered language and we don't know it differently, and it takes time to realize what we are saying and how it is gendered. So it really takes practice and learning and trying and error as well. And there will be mistakes, but that's normal. But it's comes down how you handle those errors and how you say sorry or how you I want to say yes. With language and names and pronouns, what helps me when people tell me their pronouns or names, their chosen names, to speak it out loud if you're alone, to really practice it and make, it's kind of like, sounds funny, but it helps to really get it in the brain.
It's all about respect for me, right? I think when you meet someone new and they give you their name, it's easy enough to respect that, right? And so it should be easy enough to respect their pronouns, their preferred pronouns, even if they challenge our societal norms, our gendered norms. And again, I think when you meet someone, I have a terrible memory issue. You wouldn't believe it as an engineer, but I forget things, especially names, like within 10 seconds. And so I would have to ask someone, or wait for someone to repeat their name to remember their name. This whole room, for example, if I had to remember your names, I would not get out of here alive. So I can imagine the same thing, it's the same problem with pronouns, right? And the people who may be trans, non-cis, have different pronouns to what we're typically used to. I won't say they're used to being misgendered, but they do expect a certain amount of effort from the other party to try and accommodate. And so the number of times I've been misgendered, I don't even count them anymore. But you can gently correct people, right? And if they insist, if they continue on misgendering, you can always repeat, right? Please respect my pronouns are, and if you meet someone and you don't know their pronouns and you don't want to make the assumption, you can always present yourself first and give your pronouns, right? That shows to the other person that you are gender aware, you are pronoun aware, and you're willing to ask for their pronouns. So typically, when we're going to present ourselves, hello, my name is Jen, my pronouns are she, her, and you would respond by,
my name is Lou, they, she.
There you are, right? It's I won't say it feels natural, because it probably isn't at this point in time, but it will become, right? I think this change in society is more and more visible. It's existed for centuries. We're not going to go into that history today, but people who have a different gender presentation have existed in various societies throughout the world for an extremely long time. It's simply that they've been forgotten, or they've been hidden, or they've been repressed. And in the last 20 years or so, things have started to change. Switzerland is still a little bit behind the times, but things are gradually moving, thankfully. But it's not the same as, say, England or the US. I lived in the US for about 10 years, and that's where I did my transition. Things are, I would say they're simple, right? Things are quite hard. And of course the learning curve for people, it's tough for everyone, right? It's a learning experience for everyone. So yes, I think it really boils down to respecting one another in a relationship, and I think that comes naturally.
I think there's also like a bit of awkwardness around the topic generally. I think people are really, really scared of saying the wrong thing, of offending someone, of so on. I mean, the reality is like there's going to be offense, but like in order for society to move in a progressive way, like it has to be kind of given from both sides, basically allowing people the space to make mistakes in order not to make the mistakes further down the line. And yeah, it's a work in progress. like you said, in Switzerland, it doesn't really feel like it's completely there yet. The conversation isn't on the forefront, let's say. Here it may be a bit different because we're kind of in a creative bubble, so it's kind of easier, or we're more exposed to be confronted by these topics. But I also think that kind of raises some important or interesting kind of aspects also in fashion in general. This kind of way that we broach gender expression, but it seems quite often it's quite superficial in a way, where it kind of just stays to the physical aspect and kind of doesn't really encompass the reality of the experience, because gender expression means that you can like wear clothes one day basically, and then if you want to go out in society another day and pass. So passing is a term where kind of you try and melt into cisgender society without people ever questioning the way that you appear, let's say. Yeah, I think in fashion we often look at like gender in a really superficial manner and never go into the depths of the whole experience. How do you, because you're also doing fashion, so.
Kind of becomes an aesthetic that is used and brands are using for being inclusive, or because gender people are cool and fashionable. So it's a selling point as well. It's not really talked about. I wrote a whole essay about it. How fashion is, I don't say it in English, a performative force of the norm. Yeah, and how it's pushing this picture of the norm and the norm of the body and more gender. So there's a lot of things to do. But it's always hard because it's always the people who are suffering that have to do the work. So it's kind of tough.
But isn't passing also a trap? Because passing is about aligning with existing social norms. And obviously in fashion you're trying to challenge those norms and maybe blend and come up with new expressions of appearance. But who defines passing? What is passing? Are there multiple aspects to passing? I think that there are. Now, there's presentation, there's voice, there's simple volumetrics, body volumetrics. We take a lot of cues to try and identify gender. As I said, I believe our reptilian mind, our reptilian brain, the first thing we do when we meet someone is trying to gender them, right? Because we've been socialized, educated to understand the social interactions and dominions, let's put it that way, of people. Who is the alpha? Who is the leader? And typically it's going to be the men. Right? Men are leaders in our society. But should that be? Can it also be linked to competency? I'm a consultant in IT, and typically I represent the knowledge required to execute a particular project. And generally I have to take the lead. I have to show how to approach a particular problem, how to resolve the problem, to be a knowledge center. And that can be quite challenging for people, especially if they don't acknowledge or don't respect the gender I present and challenge them with their own conceptions of gender. It's happened to me so many times that my point of view comes from an experience and a knowledge of the outcome of a particular problem, and people do not follow my advice, and we end up in the situation that was expected if you did not follow my advice, and the solution remains what I explained. That is often, for me, infuriating, because I hate losing time when I know how to approach a problem and solve it. Unfortunately, that is something that will exist, right, for a long time. Very often when you come into a room and you are in a project and you have new people who you're working with, the first step is trying to establish your competencies, right? Who is more competent in which area? Who can I go to answer certain questions? And that takes time. And generally that's why you bring in external experts to try and lead you, or if within a given project roles are predefined because of a knowledge of your previous or prior experience and competency. That's one aspect I've seen. Have you seen this here in the fashion world, or is this something that is common?
You mean kind of dismissal? Kind of based on how you identify? Yeah, some aspects, I think, because we're a lot more like queer friendly, because it's literally most of the people in fashion are somewhat on the spectrum or allies, because we're confronted it by all the time. I think in fashion at least there's a more invasive, let's say, aspect to gender because we're directly related to people's bodies. So for example, us here at school, so in work you have to do fittings, for example. So how do you go about respecting someone's body, I guess, you know? I think also because it's kind of more artistic and let's say but kind of liberal in thought process, people have more conversations, let's say. But I think people are somewhat, because it is such a topic that isn't really talked about, let's say, in great details amongst each other. I think sometimes people also ask questions that they shouldn't be asking. Do you both have any topics?
What questions are you thinking of?
I think sometimes people assume that they're entitled to private information about your life, and I think specifically about gender. A lot of people are constantly fixated on physical aspects of gender, when in reality no one's kind of entitled to know physical aspects about yourself. I think this is something that we confronted of in fittings, for example, because let's say you have like the model that you have isn't within, let's say, cisgender norms of what a cis body looks like. I think language has to be something that's very careful in these contexts because it can be, I mean, also for cis people, let's be honest, like it's kind of really intimate and a bit invasive, a fitting, when there's people around and you're in your underwear. But I think it's something to be really careful about how we broach it, how we approach it. I don't know if I actually have a clear answer of how we do that, because we don't actually have these conversations.
I've started to ask people what they need, then provide them with their gadgets and stuff that give them comfort. And also, if it is a fitting, and I know I'm working with a person who's genderqueer, I will only fit stuff the person is comfortable with, so I will not produce something that gives them dysphoria. So we don't come to this point, because it's the worst thing I can do to someone if they feel really uncomfortable and shit afterwards. So yeah, just ask, talk with them, but at the same point not in an invasive way, so that they are confronted with, like you said before, yeah, just ask them what they need to feel comfortable, and then do that for them.
Who is aware of what dysphoria is? We throw words here, but and how it expresses. I guess most cis people don't know what dysphoria is. All right, so dysphoria is essentially the sentiment, the dissociative feeling between how you internalize your gender, how you feel internally, and how you look like. And dysphoria is that, the feeling where there's a clash. And very often, is that how you, yeah. So, those who have dysphoria, and typically those who are trans, have dysphoria to a certain degree. And dysphoria can be triggered. Typically, certain situations or certain body parts can trigger dysphoria, and it's an extremely unpleasant situation. How could you define it? How could you express it? How it feels? How does dysphoria feel for you?
I want to go in shutdown mode, run away, hide, and it's tearing you apart from the inside. I want to scream. It's the most unpleasant thing I've ever felt.
Yeah, I would agree.
And
then like your reaction,
yeah,
sometimes is, the reaction afterwards when you're kind of having a break isn't very rational, and sometimes people don't really get it, let's say, or at least for me it's not always rational, the reactions. And it's complicated because a lot of things are dysphoric, but there's an obvious kind of triggers, but then there's individually, there's like some things that can just trigger you without people understanding. Yeah, that's how
it's not just like I'm not happy with the body part of mine. I think it's not. I had this conversation once when somebody said, "Yeah, you just have to get in line with your body and accept it and love it." And then like, I've tried that for a long time. It doesn't work. So it's not that you can't just think it away or change it. It's a process where you can get to a point where you recognize yourself more and more, be more comfortable with yourself. But
do any of you have questions so far?
I really think it's very nice to have this conversation here. I was just thinking that of course the body is connected with our physical experience, what we had in childhood and with the parents and the society around. And I was just thinking it's so nice that now we realize that we have these traumas we got somehow. I also can talk about myself because I have vitiligo since I'm a child. But I think it helped me also to express myself differently. But I understand now more and more it's a connection, not just about my vitiligo, but also all this experience. And I'm very happy that now, I would be happier to know it earlier, to have talked about this experience and I think fashion and how we can express this is also like healing and communicate to the society. And I think would be great how we can even find the voice, because I think a lot of people are not aware that there are traumas and that is connected with identity, and we have to be experience and playing, but we're not daring. And I think there is for me, here are we kind of in a creative bubble, safe, but outside still it's not that easy. And I found very nice this respect to say own identity first, but also I'm a little bit older. I'm now in my menopause, and it's also not that easy because you forget things, you're not less maybe concentrated. It's also an issue, and I think it's so good to talk all about the topics that are aware now. Also these, wie sagt man in Deutsch, andauernden Menschenrechtsverletzungen. I don't know in English how would you translate. These human suppressions, to really what is now in Iran, and I think it's now so much coming up to outside.
Yeah, so there's definitely a generation issue,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and I'm so happy for this young also. I mean, yeah, that it's now coming because we live it maybe more silent in another expression without, let's say, talking more to another way of creative expression maybe, but I think it's so important to talk about and to make position and to tell it because it's still a far way we have to go.
Yeah. You know, as I said, generational. My parents, so my mother had no issues with, well, I won't say had no issues. Didn't have too many issues with me announcing my transition. My father absolutely refused it. My father was born in the 30s, and I can imagine other people in society thinking that this is madness, right? But it's not madness. It's really realizing who we truly are and being able to show to the world who we truly are is way better than trying to hide behind some facade, behind clothes, behind lots of expression, just because we're unable to show who we truly are. I think if we want to be the best self, we have to be able to first show who we truly are and share it with the world.
Yeah, thank you very much, all of you, especially for you, Jane. I have a question because you're working as a HR responsible.
IT.
Okay. And how are your experiences with companies, because we are different, we are an art and design academy, but I don't think we are so different to other institutions.
Still is.
In these terms.
Corporate.
What are your experiences? Diversity, gender issues?
I think you're lucky in fashion. I think there's definitely a skew towards female in fashion. The IT is the total opposite, and it's extremely frustrating. Because, and I think most women in this room understand the frustration of being mansplained. I'm sorry for the men, but how often does it occur, right? Like, tell me something I don't know. Yeah, okay. And what's really funny for me is that, yes, I was on the other side of the barrier. I know exactly how it is, right? And I probably made the same mistakes when I was a man, or presented as a man. I won't say I was a man, so this is another topic. It's like, when your internalized gender, right, can be present since child. And this is something that people have a hard time accepting. As I tell you, I was always a woman, but I wasn't expressed as a woman. It's very difficult, especially men, to accept that, especially in the US, because queerness in certain societies is not accepted at all, especially in the US. Being gay as a man in the US is tolerated, but it's not accepted, right? If someone were to slur you and say, "Oh, you gay," right? It's an insult. It's not a compliment. So in IT, to come back to your question, it's extremely male-focused. There's a lot of... I mean, I've never been badly treated, but very often my opinion and my counsel, which is quite expensive, was ignored. And unfortunately, well, the project suffered because of it, which is kind of dumb, right? I'm not there to damage the project. I'm there to help the project. And so when such things happen, it becomes extremely infuriating for me. Right? It's one of my buttons. It's one of my issues. And at some point on some projects, I just can't take anymore, and I have to change project. And it's a loss for me. Right? It impacts my career because I cannot grow in a particular environment because they're continually either stopping my progression or not recognizing my competencies, simply because I have a different presentation, or I clash with someone else's idea of how a gender is expressed or a person presents. What is decent in a company?
Yeah, thank you.
I wondered then, not from us, but more from the team, I guess, are there actually structures in place to actually deal with being treated differently, and actually functional structures? And also, I guess, in regards for students at the school, what are the resources from the school to help students that are feeling, let's say, othered by people? Is there?
You mean institutional wise?
Yeah.
I think there is something in store, like, but I think it's just not. There's not enough human resource in it that it can really solve all the issues, because it's a huge development. I mean, starting with the diversity person we have, it's 20%, I think. And then she's focusing on conferences and to start to talk within the FHNW. We are, you know how we're structured? No, it's just a big institution, and I think that's an issue. And then we have the toilet matter. It's so huge. It became so huge, and it's not solved, I think, for 4 years now, something like this. But then also, I think when we talk about the bubble and the institution, and then when you start, you also, you know, you're a young person and it's in education, so it's a process. And I also experienced that then in the beginning, maybe it's a really personal matter. You don't want to share it, but then still we have the name list, we have the class list, we have the emails. So, you know, I think it should be also a way on onboarding here and already give the information and also who to talk to when you have several issues, personally, but also things you see institutional and structure-wise.
And what we have started, but it's not so long time ago, this person of trust, that some of the team leaders from different study program are in it, and with us is Niels in it. I think that's nice, but it's also, I think it's just a little start with less people. And then also I heard about one nice team member, I think it's with you, Eva, in the incubator. I think she has a really great project about this topic. And I hope, and she works, but I think she's from another department.
Ja, Dorian ist wissenschaftliche Mitarbeiterin and works in a psychological department.
Yeah, and I think this, I really think it's a very good also coming up issue for the whole FHNW HDK.
One of the things you said kind of made me think about dead naming. We haven't talked about that yet.
Naming,
Dead naming. So a dead name is a prior name. So if someone transitions and changes their name, and that for HR is a big issue, because sometimes it means changing a lot of official documents and a lot of official registers. So just to give you an example, at the EPFL, when I transitioned, there was no method in place to update all my documents, including my diploma. You may think it's not a big deal not to change a diploma, but I guarantee you it is. Because if you don't have updated documents, each time you go to a new employer, you're basically having to out yourself each time. And at the same time, when you do that, people automatically change their mindset, right? As soon as you say, oh, they're trans, they're queer, they're something different, oh, they're not serious, right? And it influences just so subtly, people's evaluation of you. They think you're not that great as a person who presents cis. You think it's terrible, but that's the reality of today's job market. So anyway, when I announced my change to the school, they asked me for my initial document, my initial diploma. I graduated more than 20 years ago. I do not know where that document is. I've moved more than 20 times in the past 20 years, and that document has just gotten lost, and they did not want to reissue my diploma until I gave it back to them. And that caused issues, because I wanted to find a job here in Switzerland, and I didn't want to have to add myself each time. I didn't want to have to dead name myself each time and present my previous name to other people. And the problem is, when you do that, it puts a seed in people's mind, a seed of doubt. And we really don't want that, right? You don't know what my prior name is, and you will always know me as Jen. And for me, it's not acceptable for you to ask me what my previous name is, what my dead name is, and I won't give it to you. If you knew me prior, you will know what it is. If you try to research my name, good luck. I've done my homework, and there are other people with my name, my prior name, that you'll find first. But I think it's important to realize that these are small things, and there are people here in Basel who have asked or tried to ask me what my dead name is, and unfortunately I will refuse, point blank. Same thing with, for trans people, if depending on how much dysphoria they may have some surgeries. Asking people about their medical history is not okay. Right? If you may have vitiligo, other people may have other issues, it's not okay to go asking people about what special operations they had, even if they're not visible, right? Say, I don't know, someone who had a difficult pregnancy and had a cesarean. For some people, talking about that is really difficult, and they don't want to talk about it. Same with us. And again, it just boils down to respect again.
Sometimes it feels weird because, like, if you're trans, it feels sometimes like you're obligated to tell what, not that it is, but people have the mindset they are allowed to ask questions and you have to answer because you're trans, so which operations did you have, what is your dead name? That's kind of, it's really, really crazy.
And what does it change? If you know that, what does it change?
I know.
No.
Yeah, it changes nothing.
It's also about borders. Where are the borders?
Mm-hmm.
To with the respect, to learn to make also border.
Those same people wouldn't ask a cisgender person such intrusive questions. Just like, if you're trans, let's go for it. Let's try it.
My mother is a cancer survivor. She had bilateral ablation of her breasts, but you can't see it when she's dressed. Do you think it's okay to say, oh, do you have one boob or two boobs? Hey, you're laughing, right? It's the same thing.
I think also in the way that people feel entitled to ask questions about the experience, I think also people also assume that you become this kind of representation of all these social and political ideas, as if your entire experience is just basically a banner and a representation of every thought process. And I think that because some people are kind of a bit uncomfortable talking about things, they end up bringing, I don't know if this is something you both experienced, but they end up bringing up like, oh, have you heard about this in the news? And it's always something to do about gender. And it kind of just seems like people become just ultimately completely fixated on that and can't just see you as this is a part of your identity, but this isn't the whole, like, overlining traits of your being. I don't know if this is something you
I can talk about different stuff as well.
Yeah.
It's not because we're queer that we're the encyclopedias for everyone else, right? we don't want to hear all your questions, right? We are really happy that you're interested in queer issues, but it's also up to you to do your own research and educate yourself directly. We're happy to have a conversation like today, right, and talk about the topics. But it doesn't mean that whenever you have a question like, oh, what does the surgery entail? I'm not even talking about have you had the surgery, but what does it entail? I mean, is it difficult? I guarantee you, I've attended a number of presentations of how various surgeries are done. Some of them are absolutely horrendous, and you do not want to hear about them, especially prior to lunch. No, some of them are. Some of the stuff is really hard, difficult to digest, and I think it's important that everyone learns at their own speed.
And there's more and more stuff. I had to educate myself as well. I didn't have an idol where I could look up to, so if I could manage to do it, you can as well. There's a lot of stuff on the internet, and it's easy on Google to type in stuff and do the research.
Not everything is true on the internet.
But it's also, I mean, I feel very comfortable, I have to say, with queer people. I'm really, but sometimes it's also hard how to enter, how to be part. There are not many places outside here. I mean, here I'm very privileged to be with all these unique humans here. But outside, it's where to go, how to meet, because if you feel comfortable, how to connect, it's not that easy, especially here in Switzerland. So where you go, where to meet, sometimes because I feel very comfortable, but still it's not easy to enter because it's still somehow hidden.
If you find it, please let us know.
Yeah.
Because
I'm already here because I feel very comfortable, but still I mean it's still hard to find these places.
Yeah.
I know Amsterdam people go, Berlin, but here it would be great. I don't know, I just thought is it private you meet, where you meet? Is it places to enter for us?
So there are known locations. It's in Basel, for example.
Yeah.
Typically, there's Tuesdays at Kaserne, Teach Bar. That's a well-known location.
Yeah.
The issue here, as you know, the Swiss like their clique, huh?
Yeah.
It's like my little group of friends, and I don't want to listen to whatever other people have to say or meet new people. Yes, it is very Swiss, right? The Swiss are difficult to get to know. I am Swiss. I have that same problem. I've lived outside of Switzerland, so maybe that's kind of broken. The US is kind of the opposite, right? They're overly friendly, but they're not truly themselves. They're kind of a character of themselves, right? They can be, fantastic to meet you. How can I help you today? And as soon as you start talking about things that are a little more crunchy, a little harder, about real problems, they start to shut down and they start to move away. So, oh, thanks, great to meet you. Bye, see you soon. It's finding that balance, I guess, here in Switzerland. The Swiss are shy. The Swiss are private. Then again, it's really up to all of us individually to reach out to people and get to know them, right? And again, it's like, how do you break the ice? Hello, my name's Jen. My pronouns are Shiva. And you can start the conversation, right? We all have fascinating stories, life stories, to share with one another. And I think that's one way of doing it. I think many people think when they talk to me like, oh, I'm an onion, I have so many layers. Yes, I have done so many things, and I've had 2 lives. I am one of the lucky ones that's been able to start from scratch and decide who I want to be, how I want to present. And that's even truer today because I've actually decided to stop, to retire and become independent. I've been working as a salaried person up until recently. And now I get to decide what fun things I want to do with my life.
So when we talk about nations, we also on a political level, maybe you can also say something about Switzerland from a political point of view, your experience, or if you are active or inactive, or why not active?
I think in terms of political things happening or protests, I think that it's important mentioning that a few days ago in Zurich there was a far-right neo-Nazi group that invaded a space for drag story time for kids. It kind of is a bit shocking that the police isn't essentially doing anything about it. And I think this kind of speaks about what is legal and what isn't legal in Switzerland when it comes to invading spaces and terrorizing children. Yeah, I think this also kind of raises an important question of what can you do also as allies when you see injustice happening. Whether it's the smallest thing, like you witness someone being misgendered, to big obvious things like hate crimes, let's say, right? How do you as allies fight or show your support, or on a small scale, whether it's financially or calling it out and all that. Yeah, that's what I can say. After I've been in France most of my life, so I can't say much about Switzerland. I also live in France, so I'm not in Switzerland. I found personally that for me at least, Switzerland has been a bit less problematic than my prior experiences, because I feel like in France people are not afraid to harass you in front of people on the street, in public transport, and so on. And maybe this is also part of my privilege, let's say, so that I haven't experienced such a horrifying situation. In Switzerland, I've noticed more, maybe an odd comment here and there, or someone staring at you weirdly in the street, or maybe being followed, but like nothing extreme. I feel like maybe the Swiss, like you say, because they're shy sometimes.
I've heard things in the tram, I guarantee you, I mean, you creepy crawly. It's like the old couple sitting behind me in the tram, and I have ears, I can hear, saying, "Oh, is that a woman or is that a man?" And the other person, so this is a conversation between an old couple, saying, "Oh, that's a man," right? Misgendering, clearly. That is very uncomfortable.
But because I don't speak German, but I don't know what's happening. So.
Again, trans rights or women's rights or human rights, right? So from a political perspective, yes, there are some things for the LGBTQ community that are not the same as cis, right? So for example, in the lesbian community, one of the issues that currently is trying to be changed is reproductive rights, equal reproductive rights. So right now, lesbian married couples, everyone is aware that queer marriage is now legal here in Switzerland, thank God.
Yes.
But in reproductive rights, lesbian women do not have the same rights as cis women in terms of IVF, for example. So that's a political theme, right? It's trying to ensure that human rights are the same for all, equal what presentation they have. I think that's for me it's only normal, right? We all want to be equally treated by the law, but that's unfortunately not the case, even in Switzerland.
Yeah, I may add something. I think coming back to you, Dylan, when you spoke about German, French, and English, I think, and I said it in our retreat in August, the German language is constructed or designed as an act of procreation, heterosexual procreation between man and woman. And everything which is not belonging to this construction is excluded since about 200 years. And in this way, I think we need a new speech new languages and new narratives, especially in fashion and design, but also in different parts of our culture. And the second point is, I had an interview last week with this gay magazine called Mannschaft, and it has been about queer art. And the journalist, Open Gay, asked me a lot of cliché about fashion, art, and so on. And I think there are some diverse parts in the queer community itself. When cis gay men look to trans people in culture, you mentioned it, Dylan, with drag and so on. It's not only the Swiss culture, it's something in between the community itself. That these are my experience, my personal experience as a gay man. We have to work and become more progressive.
But then if people try this new language, we know we have to change our behaviors, what we learned.
Yeah.
And when you try this new language in different way to express, to communicate, you always have a reaction. And then this other sometimes not can understand this new, let's say, language. And then I think also, is it then important to have a kind of translating action? Because this new, it's so hard for people because they don't know to understand, and that also makes a big frustration. So how would you then, what could we offer for this?
In French, we have something that's, it's not widespread, but the kind of feminist movement started in France, which is écriture inclusive, inclusive writing. I think because we talked about emails, for example, before, like signing pronouns to an email should be kind of normalized and stuff like this. I think that, like if you're sending, for example, like a general email to like multiple classes, as it often happens here, I think like putting like slash and then the female, male version of the same word, for example, like it's a really easy way of like really just be a bit more inclusive in language, I think, and I think that that's something that generally I think everyone can actually understand because it's quite simple. As for spoken, I don't know because I don't speak German, so.
There's a company in Zurich who specializes in making texts, normally HR announcers for jobs, for example, more neutral. I mean, language is, words are powerful, right? And depending on how you choose them, you as a woman may not feel that a particular job description fits you, right? Because the words are more masculine, for example. Well, this particular company in Zurich has a translator that basically takes a text and tries to refine it into a more neutral form. So there are some companies out there who are trying to bring tools to help people be more inclusive in their communication. But not everyone uses it, obviously, right? This is something that needs to be checked. I think even though there is a way of having the two forms, I think the easier way is trying to not neutralize, but have a more neutral approach or a choice of words that ensure that everyone feels included. Obviously, as you were mentioning earlier on, some languages are more difficult to do that than others. English is a very open and neutral language, right? The they form is quite common, but yell in French, and I'm not sure what the word is in German for... Yeah, yeah, I've never used it, and for me that's a learning curve.
So, thank you so much for the talk this morning. Thank you so much to open up, all your experiences and also to educate us as your allies. And I think the last question is, we have, an hour has passed, and of course we can talk and talk the whole day because this issue is, or this topic is it's never ending, right? There's a lot to learn, there's a lot to unlearn also for us. But I think just the last questions before we go to a break is like, what can we help as an ally in terms of school, in terms of you now, an alumni, or also you, Jen, outside society in Switzerland, even though I'm not Swiss, but you know, I'm here. So yeah, what would be like the first thing that crossed your mind now, just something that you're like, hey, I want this, can you help us?
I think calling it out when you see it.
Yeah.
I think literally that would make such a difference if people would just, if you see something, to instantly react basically and not let it dwell so it becomes something worse. Yeah.
And for you, Lou, we had an issue, you know, at the beginning also, we had this email, and for us it's also like really good, you know, to email from John about like pronouns, you know.
Yeah. Maybe it's nothing for me anymore, but if there might be people whose email address not match their name.
Yeah.
So be careful to read how the person is ending their mail, and then address the person with that name. Because it's this institution, it gets easier, but it's still a struggle to change your email address and stuff. And this is also a whole topic. It should be more accessible, because I did the research and I had like, I found a document which said that it's possible to change it, but the administration said it's not possible. So yeah, maybe in this direction as well.
Okay. Yeah.
Because transitioning also at the state level with names, and it's a big step and it's not easy, and like in this small circle in this institution really can help to give this comfort and this positive experience, so it makes it easier. You can't expect that everybody is ready to go to the state and say, hey.
Yeah. Thank you. Jen?
What would I ask? Yeah, just openness and respect. For me, it's I'm happy to share my story, my experience. If I meet someone in the street, same thing, right? I mean, we're just human, and we're here for a blip on this little ball in the middle of the galaxy. So let's enjoy each other.
Yeah. Thank you. Some breakfast, and we have a break until 11. The team, we have to sadly go to